So yeah, it was not my favorite book of the year. So this was a very long talk about the first book in here. I will probably put like timestamps in the description in case you guys want to skip certain parts of this video. Hey everyone, Cleo here, welcome to my channel, and today I am giving you my December wrap-up. So for anybody who has actually paid attention to my December TBR, there are gonna be some changes. I already made changes actually in my November wrap-up because I realized that with the books that I had to carry over from November into December, there was going to be no way that I was going to finish all the books that I had on my December TBR. In any case, there were already too many books on my December TBR to get around to all of them. But at that point I was like totally sure, so I already kicked off one book of my list, basically the longest book that was on there. But even with that being, with that adjustment being made, I still didn't get around to all of them, but also because I added stuff to this list. So I added, I distracted, I added, I subtracted. I feel like that is just like I did what I wanted to do. In any case, December turned out to be the biggest reading month for me in terms of page count. So I read like, I don't know the exact count anymore, but I think it was like 3,700 pages or something like that. And the previous month that was the best was like somewhere in the 2,700 or 2,800, something like that. But it's the first month in which I read over 3,000 pages, and I went super close to 4,000 even. So I'm super happy with my reading month, and I'm also super happy with the changes that I made, because I will discuss this also in some other videos around this period, but I feel like I sometimes get too caught up in my TBRs, you know. Sometimes I feel like, you know, I will put a first book in a series in there, for example, and I'll really want to get around to the second one, but I'll feel like, okay, this is not on my TBR for this month, so I cannot do it. I'm repeating a video that I've already done, so let's stop talking about my TBR. But so in any case, the book that I had to carry over from, well, I had two books to carry over from the month of November. One of them was a reread, so that was a big success. I already knew it was going to be a big success. The other one was a first time read that I started with good hopes. I really liked the way it was going at the beginning, but sadly it has turned out to be the worst book for me for 2019, which is very sad because it was also the final book I finished in 2019. But so the book that I'm talking about is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. If you've ever read this book, maybe you know what I'm talking about. If not, this book is very much a controversial book. So it's a very famous book, and it's one of those books that you will often find in like lists of classics and things like that. It's like on the brink of classic, modern classic. It was published somewhere in the 40s. So a lot of times, like, what people will say is like the periods, like a lot of times people will say you can only call a classic something a classic if it predates World War II. So in this case it doesn't predate it, it was set during World War II, but so it is more or less on that break between the two periods. But it is a sort of book that you either hate or you love. And based on experiences or based on like reviews and things like that, it seems to be like a lot of times it is something that people fell in love with in high school and then fell out of love with when they reread it at later ages. I don't think that this is something for our times now. I don't think that teenagers who would read this book at this point in time actually will fall in love with it. I don't know, maybe some cases, but like not the general teenage public, I think, because this was boring in a sense. And the annoying thing is that I really liked it in the beginning. So we are following Howard Rourke, and Howard Rourke at the beginning of this book, he is living with Peter Keating, and they both were attending the same architecture school, but Peter has just graduated, top honors. He's accepted to go to a sort of super good school in Paris for architecture, but he can also go and join like a prestigious architecture firm, which he then does. Howard, on the other hand, has just been kicked out of architecture school when he's just about to set forth and go to his final year, because his teachers believe that his vision in terms of architectural projects is too drastic, it's too radical. He's very modernistic, very futuristic in his architecture, and he does not compromise. He cannot, if he's given an assignment to do something in a certain style, he does not do it, he does it in his own style. And so his teachers feel like they have to let him go because he's never going to make it out on the job market, and they don't want him to make it out onto the job market because they don't accept the way that he creates his architectural plans. But so these two youngsters set out into the world and they start to make a career for themselves. And so Peter is very much the person who is doing what people expect him to do. He is very easy at like interacting with people and like making them feel important, giving them self-esteem in order for him to get a commission, and so he rises in the ranks pretty fast. Howard, on the other hand, is horrible with people because he has his way of seeing things and he will never compromise his vision. So when somebody were to say like, but I want that in like a Renaissance style, he's like, no, you don't want me, so no, I don't want a commission. So Howard is having difficulties getting around. He does find a mentor who is a like sort of fallen architect who is very much has the same vision than Howard does, but as I said, he is a fallen architect, so he doesn't really have that much prospects, and so Howard and his mentor are basically struggling to get by. At first I really like this concept. I like this look at like persons who are kind of like, we are kind of looking at two different persons. Somebody who doesn't necessarily have the talent, but who knows how to work people and how to get things done. And somebody who has the talent, the passion, the vision, but who is very hard, he's very difficult with people. And so we're kind of looking at like the way that this plays out. And you're kind of like rooting for passion and vision and talent to win out. However, I think for the first 200 pages or something, I was still on board with all of this. But then things started to take a turn for the worse, and whereas at first I felt like the book flowed super fast and I was getting, I was really just eager to see things turn around for Howard, and so I was just like trucking through it very fast. After the like 200 page mark or something like that, things started to change. And what changed in big respects is also a sort of toxic relationship that I feel is in there. So we are introduced as well to a certain character who's called Dominique, and she is very much along the lines of Howard, and she also recognizes the genius that is Howard. However, she is determined to kind of keep his vision pure in a sense, and the only way that she sees to do that is to kind of destroy his career. She's working against him at every step of the way. Howard recognizes that she's working against him, but seems to just like accept that, and like he just seems to have a sort of like sarcastic appreciation for the fact that she does that, and then they have a romantic relation at the same time, even though the first time that they meet each other, she explains it as in he raped her, even though she seems to be wanting that to happen as well, which is a very wrong message to send out into the world. And so at all times in this book there's this sort of push and pull between these characters where they are fit for each other, but she at least is trying to destroy him, trying to work against him. Whenever you think that they might get together, then they still work, and then it doesn't work out, and then they at certain times she seems to be wanting to like submit to his way, but then that submission would also mean a destruction of who she is or something like that. In any case, I thought that was a toxic relation that really wasn't good and really wasn't healthy on page neither, and that really took the pacing down for me a lot of times, because that seemed to be the central point for a very big part of the book. At a certain point, this actually then turns into a love triangle. So Dominique, multiple times in the books, kind of says like, "Who's the worst person I could marry in order to offend Howard," or something like that. Who's like the most compromising person I could marry, and the first one doesn't work out. The second one then is actually the start of a sort of like love triangle. So, and it's a love triangle that's really one of the love triangles that in a sense is the one that works the best, because both Dominique and Howard really love this other person, this other man, and of course in Howard's case this is a platonic relationship. It's very much just them recognizing a kindred spirit. But this really works in a three-way version. You know, a lot of times when love triangles are being handled, then there's this sort of there's this jealousy between the male characters in the love triangle, and there's this whole case of like competition. In this case, one of the characters just doesn't know that there is a love triangle going on, and so there is no competition between these characters, and so it actually works pretty well. And at that point I was kind of hoping that things were turning around, but sadly they don't. So all in all, that was what started to turn the book away from me. Like, that's what started to get me annoyed with the book. But definitely at the ending I was really also starting to get annoyed with all of these monologues about her philosophy. So this book is very much about a theory that she has, which is called objectivism. So she believes in objectivism, being that every man stands for himself, basically. So the book is very much a attack on altruism. So she's saying altruism is a way for self-esteem to be for your self-esteem to be made by others, and she feels like your self-esteem should be coming from yourself. So far so good. And so she feels, but so in order for you to get your self-esteem, you should just be living for yourself every second of the way. So you and your happiness is the key goal. And the way for you to get to your happiness is by using your logical brain at all times. And to some extent I understand that concept, but what she also negates is she doesn't accept the fact that, for example, your gender or your economic circumstances have an impact on your life. So she feels like no matter what your gender, you can make it to the top of the world without having any impact. No matter your economic circumstances, you can be born as poor as possible, can be part of a race that has a more difficult path in life, but you will still be able to manage that. It will all just depend on you yourself, on your strengths, on you fighting for your happiness. And I do think that that is definitely neglecting a whole lot of the difficulties and the complexities of these types of situations, these types of circumstances. And as a female herself, I feel like she should have understood that as well. So I definitely couldn't get by that philosophy, and that philosophy is ingrained in the book a lot of the time. And so far for the fact that I don't agree with that philosophy, but I also feel like if you're going to make your work be about a certain philosophy that you uphold, then your work should do the talking. You shouldn't be using your work as a mouthpiece for your views, for example. I feel like we should be uncovering this theory ourselves through the actions of our characters or through dialogue or something like that, but not through like whole monologues that these characters are giving about the reasoning behind their actions or about what they appreciate in the world or what not, and things like that. So I definitely didn't appreciate the writing style anymore towards the end. I feel like either in the beginning it wasn't done as much, or I just hadn't gotten so tired of it yet. But I felt like in the beginning the writing flowed a lot more. It was very fast-paced at that point for me, and at the ending it just became a slug for me to get through, and just every decision that characters were making was a decision that I didn't want to take. And in the end, the only character that I ended up still liking was Peter Keating, even though he's the one who I was like rooting against at the beginning. So yeah, it was not my favorite book of the year. So this was a very long talk about the first book in here. I will probably put like timestamps in the description in case you guys want to skip certain parts of this video. But if you already made it here, then I guess you watched through the longest one. Now, the second book that I had to carry over from November is actually a reread, and that is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix in the Spanish edition. So Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, fifth book in this Harry Potter series, is my favorite Harry Potter, and it held up on reread. I must say that I was kind of struggling to get through it all. I didn't remember it as being that long because I don't think I've ever reread it in its entirety. I've always reread certain passages of it. So in a sense that was nice because it allowed me to rediscover certain things about this book, like the small day-to-day things in Hogwarts that are happening throughout this book that I'd forgotten about. I had forgotten about how the whole Quidditch season plays out in this one, for example. It was a bit sad for me that it turned out to be a little bit of a struggle for me to get through it. However, once I dedicated myself to it and just like made myself read like 2 chapters a day or something for it, then I was getting through it at a really quick pace and was really starting to enjoy it a lot more again. I do also regret to say that this was the first time I read this book that I didn't cry at the end, so but I do think that is just maybe because of the fact that it is already such a part of I already know what is happening so well, and or maybe I just wasn't in the crying mood at the time when I read that particular scene. But so yeah, one of my favorite books, and I love the character of Dolores Umbridge, and I loved reading about her again, and love to hate, but this is really a character that is very well developed in the book. And then we are on to 3 other books in a series that I read this year, and I was only supposed to be reading one of them. So one of them was on my 2019 TBR, and the other 2 weren't, but instead of reading the other 2 books that were actually still on my 2019 TBR, I read the sequels, and I'm happy I did. So I don't know whether I'm going to be carrying over the ones from the 2019 TBR that I didn't get around to next year, or whether I'll just see whether I pick them up naturally or not. But the series that I'm talking about is the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. So the Remnant Chronicles is a YA fantasy series in which we follow a princess who has been married off to a rival kingdom. So on the day that she's supposed to marry this prince that she doesn't know, she decides to run away because she does not want this for her life, and so she decides that she will just claim the life that she wants for herself. So she runs off to a small town in the neighborhood, and she leaves all sort of fake trails and things like that, but still 2 people follow her. One of them is the prince that she just left at the altar, the other is an assassin who is sent to kill her. So I knew this premise beforehand, but what I found interesting, what I didn't know was going to happen at the beginning, is that we are kept in the dark about the identity of the prince and the assassin for like the majority of this book. So for the majority of this book, the chapters that are from their perspective are just called the prince or the assassin, and you naturally make certain assumptions for who's who, and so it's interesting at a later point in the book to see whether you were correct about your assumptions or whether you weren't. But so yeah, I really loved it. I fell in love with the romance in here, but also with our main characters, which is the biggest romance for me, I guess, because Leah is a sort of character that a lot of times has been attempted in YA fantasy, but I don't feel like it has been done the way it's been done here. She really is a strong female character, and not just in the fact that she can wield a blade, she can cheat at card games or things like that. She really does manage to stick up for herself, to have these guys wanting to protect her, but also respecting the fact that she can manage for herself. Not necessarily always immediately, they sometimes need a learning curve, but throughout we see these boys also giving her the freedom to stand on her own, and she is also not afraid to take her own position. She's also stepping out into the unknown a little bit, because there is a certain gift that has been passed down from female to female in her family line. She thought that she didn't have it, but she's starting to discover that maybe she did, and she's trying to learn more about this. Really loved it, highly recommend. And so, just to complete this review for this Remnant Chronicle, the Heart of Betrayal is the sequel, and the final book in this series is The Beauty of Darkness. I do think that my favorite book is probably still The Kiss of Deception, the first one, but I definitely loved the sequels very much. I think they really did a good job of furthering the plot. A lot of times I feel like when you have a strong first book that's basically just based on that premise that was strong, and then they want to do something more with it, and that oftentimes for me just takes me away from what I liked about the premise to start with. And obviously in this case as well, at the end of the first book you know who the prince is, you know who the assassin is. So in principle it would be possible for this whole series to flop at that point, but she really managed to come back. But she really managed to come back strong in the second book, to place seeds in the first book that would make a very strong plotline in the second book and a very great conclusion in the third one. I think the third is my least favorite overall, but still I really enjoyed that one as well, and I do think like it had some interesting character working there as well. If I'm gonna be picky, I didn't really necessarily like the ending, just because it's the expected ending, and I don't necessarily like expected endings a lot of the times. So yeah, final book for the month of December is actually on my shelf, so I'm going to have to go get it. So the final book for the month of December is a book that came out at the very end of November, that I tried to finish at the very end of November, but I finished it at the very beginning of December instead, and that is the sequel to Skyward Starsight by Sanderson. So this is the UK edition, it's a signed edition. But so yeah, I'm very happy. I really wanted this edition in any case, and I really wanted a signed Sanderson, so I'm happy that I went for this one. So in Skyward by Sanderson we follow Spensa. Spensa is a kind of sort of like outcast in society because her father was a like famous fighter pilot in this society, but he abandoned ship during like one of the biggest missions of their history, and so he is branded a coward. And cowardice is like the worst thing in this society. So this is very much a society that favors bravery over everything, and bravery is what gets you to the top in this world. But cowardice is like the worst thing, and so she's kind of labeled a coward by association, and so she is having difficult times getting around to this world. But her big dream is to become a fighter pilot like her father and prove that she's not a coward, prove that she is as brave as anybody else. But she is struggling to get into flight school because people are working against her and people don't want to give her a chance to prove herself. And so in the second book we are also dealing a lot with the whole discussion around cowardice and bravery. The setup for this book was a bit flimsy and a little bit gratuitous. It's like the plot kind of comes falling out of the sky in a way, and that is kind of like the minor things about this thing. But we are expanding the world in this one and being introduced to kind of the like opposite society to this one. So the society of Spensa is a society that favors bravery. The society that we're being introduced to here is one that actually favors more like they obviously don't call it cowardice, but more like safety and stability, and looking at things from a more like and looking at things from like diplomatic points of view and things like that. So they see everything that is like they easily see acts of bravery as acts of aggression and acts of assertiveness. Assertive acts, for example, are not assertive, they are instantly seen as aggressive. And so this is a difficult landscape for Spensa to navigate, because even though she has taken down her aggressive tone a lot since the beginnings of the first books, this is obviously not what she is used to, and so she needs to navigate a totally different world. Through these circumstances of the beginning of the book, we are also taken away from our regular cast from the first book, and that's also one of my major problems with this book, is that I started to miss a lot of those connections, and I felt like the second book in a way was very much of a reset in that sense. You know, we are taking our character out of her familiar environment, and even though she has these sort of like the growth of her character and the growth of knowledge that she has had in the first book, in all other respects of the story, we are taking her back to square one and reintroducing her to certain elements, to new people, and that just felt a little bit too like episodic. It felt like a sort of like episodic TV series, and I don't like my TV series to be episodic. I like them to have an overall story more than that. So I really hope that when we get around to the third book, that the elements will collide, that these two worlds will collide, and indeed we have a central plot coming forth from these two more or less separate books. They're not separate, but I mean, because of the whole new cast of characters, the whole new setting, I did feel like they were somewhat separate from each other. So I do hope that that will be improved in the next ones, because there are definitely characters that I missed throughout this one, and that was definitely a bit of a shame. It's like, I won't say it's a total disappointment, but I was definitely expecting a lot more from this book than what I got in the end, and so I really hope that Brandon Sanderson can show me otherwise in the third book. But so yeah, these are the books for the month of December. I had a great reading month, and so I'm hoping to continue this trend into the new year. So I have set my New Year's, like my Goodreads goal for 2020 to 52 books, so I managed to read 56 in 2019, and so I hope that I will easily get to the 52 again in 2020, but I also didn't want to like set my goal too high so that it becomes too much of a like challenge to get there, because I don't like to feel the stress of being like, oh no, I won't make my goal. So I'd rather set a goal that I know I'll be able to get, rather than one that's a bit of a challenge. Actually, the 52 is already a lot higher than I planned in advance, because I actually wanted to put it at like 45, I think, because I think this year my goal was 40 books, and so I wanted to up it a little bit, but not too much, just gradually keep upping it. But so because of the very good reading year I've had, and I've decided to make it to 52 books, and we'll see what happens. But so yeah, see you guys for the next one. So next, for me at least, filming wise, is going to be my best books of 2019. Really looking forward to it, so you can also look forward to this video coming out whenever I finally got around to editing this one. So yeah, see you guys.